Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Eggs. Today's special guest is Adam Goldman, founder of Franchise Coach. How are you, Adam?
Doing great. How you doing today?
So good. Thanks so much for making time for us and doing the show. We appreciate you.
Absolutely.
Why don't you give us a brief overview of who you are, what you do, how you got started doing what you do?
So I'm something called a franchise coach and consultant. And it's interesting because I didn't even know that this existed when I bought my franchise 15 years ago. And my role is, I think of myself as being a matchmaker between people that want to invest in franchise businesses and really, really good pre-screened franchise businesses that are in 75 different brands. I make those matches, and it's the franchise brand that pays me a commission if I make a successful placement.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's interesting. So we had a guy on the show 100 years ago that talked to us about franchises, and it's a really interesting topic, and we haven't talked about it in several years. So I'm excited to have this conversation with you because, you know, there's a lot of, I guess, I don't know if you want to call it pressure, but in just sort of general popular media, there's kind of a lot of, you know, pressure, I'll use that word, around, you know, entrepreneurship and building your own business and all these kinds of things. Or at least that's what you sort of see in sort of, you know, business Instagram or business TikTok. And so, but I think franchising is an interesting approach in that it's still your own business, but it's maybe handled a little differently. So I wonder if you maybe just start off by talking a little bit about kind of the benefits or the reason people might get into franchises, and then how that might sort of scratch the entrepreneurial itch for people.
So look, great question. And my understanding is that there are different types of entrepreneurs, right? Ryan and Mike, you have people that are just kind of great entrepreneurs that can start from scratch, right? And that's a skill set. In Gerber's book called The E-Myth, he talked about when people start a business without any processes, then the challenge that they have is that they find themselves doing all these different things. They become the secretary, they become the salesperson and the accounting person. In an ideal world with a franchise business that has great systems and a great brand, it's a kind of thing that would allow you potentially to scale a business in a way that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. And that's kind of the case for franchises, right? You're getting systems and processes in a brand. My successful candidates are ones that tell me, oh my gosh, Adam, this is all the money that I've saved by all these processes that I otherwise would have spent trying to figure this process out. So the disadvantage of franchises, frankly, is you got to spend money on royalty fees and franchise fees. But if it's worth it, then it makes sense to invest in a franchise.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. So go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
I've looked into a couple franchises over the years, and more just kicking tires than actually wanting to pull the trigger and get into it. It's cool, and it's also kind of crazy some of the amounts they're asking for just to get started, and not absurdly crazy, but at the same time, I look at that and I'm like, well, I could just, you know, call it something else and do the same thing and save $100,000. What's the actual, I mean, I guess you just mentioned the systems in place, the getting everything like your actual menu figured out, your pipeline for your supplies figured out, your management training, all that stuff. I guess that might be worth it, but what's keeping people from just kind of like doing it on their own? And would you advise for or against that? I guess for in your opinion, because it's what you do. But you see where I'm going with that? It's like
Absolutely. And look, with my candidates, I always promise to tell them if I don't think that I'm a fit for them, because franchising is not for everyone. I want to let them know, right? The kind of person that's not a good fit for franchising, and Mike, you might not be a fit, right? Is the kind of person that goes and buys a McDonald's and says, hey, I don't see any value from the system that they spend millions of dollars on to create. I want to start selling gyros. I don't like golden arches. I want something else instead, right? It's a different type of entrepreneur that sees the value in having this.
The McDonald's, for example, that franchise in particular is one of the ones that don't you almost have to have, you know, $10 million in the bank to even be able to apply?
I'm not sure if it's 10 million, right? But it's expensive. But look, I'll give you an example. Let's say, I'm not saying that you would do this, but let's say that you potentially were something on the lower end. Let's say it was mosquito spraying, right? As an industry, right? You could get into an industry like mosquito spraying all in for $125,000. It's very high margin, meaning the supplies to go ahead and to spray for mosquitoes is very inexpensive. And if you were to start that from scratch, right, you wouldn't know how to find clients. You might put some sort of ads up or put up a website, but it's just all these different things you probably didn't think about. In my experience, my candidates tend to underestimate how valuable the system is from the franchise brand.
Yeah. The I guess that example's the extreme opposite end of McDonald's comparison to a mosquito brand. But I guess that's the best part about what you do is you're not necessarily doing restaurants only. You can also, I'm sure you probably work with like plumbers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the systems in place are critical for like jumping off the ship running. Like getting on the ground and getting business and getting money coming in. I'm sure if I wanted to learn how to be a mosquito technician and go out and spray for mosquitoes, you know, 4 or 5 months of research, $1,000 in equipment or more, probably a little more. You could probably start it yourself, but like you said, the infrastructure as far as marketing, spreading the brand, getting leads, lead generation, all that stuff is probably what you're paying for in the brand recognition. Someone that's already built it up, that right there could be worth the money all by itself. So
Yeah, well, and
maybe.
I would just add to that too. I mean, like even in my own experience, I mean, a mosquito business actually would be awesome out where I live. But
Hmm.
so as a perfect example. But the establishment of all those processes and things, I think, is one of the maybe biggest chasms for your sort of casual entrepreneur, or maybe your person who's like let's say a tradesperson or something who decides to start a business kind of doing what they do, right? So they've created a business around, maybe they weld, or in my case, like I started my business around graphic design 20 years ago because I was a graphic designer, right? So I started a business like that, but it's like, even today, like our processes are scant. The things that we do, so we've been at work 20 years. We've done work for, some of the biggest clients in the country or biggest customers in the country. And we still, have very minimal process. And, and I think, and I love that you brought up the e-myth, um, because as we get to, I don't know, my later stage of life, I may want to sell this business or something one day. And that lack of process might be the thing that stops it from being sellable, let's say. And so stepping into a franchise where you are already have processes established and you already have some of those things is like a real cheat code, I think, for people who aren't necessarily, I don't know, not to crap on myself too much, but to say business minded, where I didn't go into my business as a business. I went into my business as a job, as a way to make income doing what I do. Right. And so I think a franchise is a good way for somebody who's maybe not 100% in, like, to Mike's point about being able to make your own business or start from scratch. Maybe that's not your strength, but really you're a great operator and you'd really rather just go operate. So I think franchises make a good opportunity for that.
Or maybe you're risk averse, right? Maybe you've been in corporate America for 20 or 30 years, you've been laid off. I read recently that USAA and Intel are the corporations that have had the biggest layoffs in the United States in 2024, Tesla as well, and Microsoft. I mean, maybe you're just not ready to go out on your own. And people tend to underestimate as well how valuable a network of other franchisees is as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And so in your mind, or at least as you start to, work with different potential clients, or if you were advising somebody who's interested in getting into franchising, like, I guess, what are the arguments for and the arguments against? I mean, obviously I guess there's probably a little bit of an ROI kind of thing that you've got to look into and some of this stuff. But like one thing in particular, as I was looking into or listening, I guess read, I don't know what you call it when you listen to an audiobook, but I listened to your audiobook. And one of the things that you brought up that I thought was kind of interesting, that there's an example in there of, I guess, one of your past clients who was working with a franchise company, and the franchisor was really hands-on when it came to like real estate selection, for example. So I think the example that you were giving in the book was from Houston, and this particular franchise had a lot of locations or something like that. But there's, I guess, A tier, B tier, C tier locations. But this particular franchisor was really hands-on in choosing real estate. So when you were trying to become a franchisee of this particular organization, it part of the ROI or part of the benefit in using them. So even if it was costly, but part of the benefit of joining their franchise in particular was that they would help you find good real estate or make sure that you didn't choose bad real estate that was actually going to end up costing you money, or, I guess, so you're kind of hedging your bet with the business, right? Because by choosing a good franchise and having a good franchisor, they're almost kind of looking out for your success, where you don't get that kind of safety net in a regular business.
Yeah. So that's a good point. I mean, I think what I heard from you is a question of what the franchisor is bringing, right? What does the system mean? Is that correct? What I heard?
Well, that's, I think, kind of. So Mike brought up the point about just the cost, right? I mean, obviously getting into a franchise is costly and it does turn people away. But I guess the point that I'm trying to explore is more about like, yes, it costs money, but it might be worth it, right? So like, I mean, if you buy into McDonald's and it does cost $5 million or whatever, $1 million to be involved, um, what's the likelihood of success, however, right? Because they're a vetted company. They've been doing this a long time. They've got the best real estate, like the return's probably going to be worth the cost, right? You don't see a ton of McDonald's going out of business, so it's, but so I guess for the maybe risk averse, like you mentioned, maybe the question here is just, how do we justify the cost of getting into a franchise?
And I would argue for the right franchise brand, it's a good investment, right? With the caveat that it's not the kind of thing where you wave a magic wand, it's going to work out great. It's a thing where you invest in a great business with good systems, right? And you're going to go ahead and put that work in, a cultural fit. Then it makes sense. I mean, let's talk about service businesses in general, not necessarily mosquito spraying, but one industry that I like very much are things that are need to have as opposed to nice to have. And if you were to start a home health agency or home health care company, everyone's talking about the silver tsunami. From scratch, you wouldn't know where to start with regulations, et cetera. I mean, that's one where you could get a lot of value from the franchise brand. And if you're the right candidate, this would be on the lower end of investments.
So that's kind of an interesting one to me, because you would think something in that world, home health, you would almost think that education is involved in, like maybe being an RN, maybe being, in that industry to begin with, and then kind of switching into that industry. But someone just coming off the street looking for a paycheck, that might not be the right fit for, maybe it's like being a running a plumbing business and having plumbers underneath you kind of thing, and you might not necessarily know how to be a plumber, but you can have plumbers working for you kind of thing. Is that what that kind of thing would be?
So I'm glad, look, I'm glad you brought that up, because I give my candidates 3 brands, and a lot of times 97% of these 3 brands are kind of similar, right? And one brand might be in mosquito spraying, the other one in home healthcare, but you're right, that other 3%, maybe you don't have a passion for helping the elderly, right? Then you probably wouldn't pick that one. And I probably wouldn't mention that industry to begin with if I didn't think it was a good cultural fit for you. So kind of to piggyback on what you said about having an affinity or whatever it might be, I mean, a lot of my businesses are things that, because of the system that you have, you don't necessarily have to be a psychiatrist or a therapist to open a therapy clinic, or you don't need to be a doctor to open a med spa per se. You just have to have some sort of a passion. The great franchisors have this system in place that business people, businessmen and women, are able to actually start these businesses without being the actual person that's doing the work.
Yeah, I think of like Great Clips or Sport Clips or something like that. I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that own those franchises that have never cut a head of hair. So,
yep. And look, I'm Exhibit A. I owned an office cleaning master franchise for 8.5 years. I knew nothing about cleaning. I'll never forget my first day as a franchisee, and also franchisor, where I went to visit the client that I'd cleaned the night before, and I almost laughed because they were complaining about the cleaning crew the evening before, and I was the cleaning crew, right? I'm the one that missed some of these things the previous night.
Yeah, that's got to be fun.
Well, let's talk a little bit then, like, I guess sort of go through the process a little bit, right? So I guess maybe first things first, okay, let's say I'm a a well-qualified person. I've set a little bit of money aside. Maybe I want to escape corporate America. I know that's something that you sort of talk a lot about, which is sort of jumping ship or pivoting into your own business instead of, working for the man. Let's talk about what those first discussions sound like, maybe beginning with, vetting to franchise or not to franchise. And then, it sort of what that process looks like as we move through it.
So first part of the process is just kind of determining if someone is a fit in general, right? If I can help them with my service. And then I have them fill out a survey just to kind of get to know them better, and something that would allow me for our next discussion, which is typically about 45 minutes to an hour by Zoom, where I'm just really getting to know them better. And then after we have this 45 minutes to an hour Zoom, then I go ahead and I connect them with 3 brands that I think are the best fit in their home market. And then after I give them those 3, typically my candidates are really on a pretty short timeline to say yes or no to these brands. And the investigation process includes looking at FDDs, talking to existing franchisees, and going to something called a Meet the Team Day or Discovery Day with franchise brands. It's typically about 10 to 20 hours of investigation time to say yes or no to the 3 brands.
Okay, and you mentioned that sometimes they're on a short timeline. Why is that?
Why are people on a short timeline?
Well, yeah, do these opportunities disappear, or what's the pressure?
Well, there's never any pressure for anyone, right? What I find is that my candidates typically are ready to say yes or no within 2 to 4 weeks, or 10 to 20 hours, because they have enough information.
Okay, and you mentioned an FDD. What is that?
That's called a franchise disclosure document. It's about 200 pages. Every franchise brand is required by the Federal Trade Commission to have this document. And it's one way that has information, but more importantly, it's just kind of it's a tool for people to kind of find out about franchises. In my opinion, it's not as good of a tool as going ahead and talking to existing franchisees.
Okay. So if I've made the decision, okay, hey, you know what, franchising seems right for me. Maybe you've presented a couple options to me. Based on our conversations, we're trying to figure out what or try and find one that I have a passion for, or I feel good about. What are the sorts of things that I need to be looking at in terms of making a decision? So somebody's handed me this FDD document. I'm flipping through it. I don't know what's going on. I'm going, hey, Adam, what do I need to know if this is a good choice? What separates a good franchise from a bad one?
So great question. I'd say the best way to do that is talking to existing franchisees, right? And just kind of seeing what validation is like from them. Things such as how good is support, right? How you can even ask them things like, how long did it take for you to break even? How much money are you making now? If you live in Houston, Texas, like I do, and the franchise brand has someone in Dallas that's doing great, right? Then that's a good indication they have similar background to you. Then why would it not work in Houston?
Okay.
So I've actually I used to own a U.S. cellular store back in the day. So I've done it through the cellular world, and I've also done it through Cricket. I went through the processes of opening a couple Cricket branches in Phoenix. I never actually pulled the trigger on it because of location, and it was 100% location. They were trying to. With U.S. Cellular, I didn't have an issue getting the store open. There weren't any competitors around me, but in Phoenix, I couldn't get any locations that I wanted to get that I felt comfortable seeing a return on. I know that Starbucks and the Chipotle's and stuff like that, they only have a certain amount of locations that they'll put in a certain market based on they don't want to compete with other franchises in the area. So that is a nice perk to some because you know that you're not going to have direct competition a block away. But at the same time, I see Starbucks on 2 corner blocks in a small city in Pocatello. So how do you know that you're actually getting the protections and they're actually going to take care of you after you've spent all the franchise money, that you're not just going to turn around and see a direct competitor across the street?
So that's a great question. I mean, you go through the disclosure document, right? 90 to 95% of franchise brands are territory based, meaning it's a situation where you own specific zip codes, So if you're in Phoenix, you might be protected in all of the zip codes of Scottsdale, right? But someone could go ahead and put something in another section of town in Phoenix.
So it's all in what you do initially in your initial agreements on whether they can or can't do certain things.
That's correct. Yes, and look, I mean, I've seen situations in franchise brands where literally people can open across the street from you. Some franchise brands that are territory based or that are brick and mortar retail, they don't give enough protection to their franchisees, and that's not a good situation to be in.
So
Yeah.
I guess, I mean, I've got my FDD docs and we're looking at some of those kinds of things. Are there certain types of franchises that you steer people to more commonly, maybe for using this protections as an example? I mean, are some better at that than others? You mentioned maybe brick and mortar aren't as good as others. Like, are there certain characteristics or certain things that you look for when making a recommendation for one of your customers, or a client? If you're going to drive a franchise business to that person, what kind of opportunities? I assume you're doing some vetting on your end prior.
Yep.
So what sorts of things are you looking at before you hand that off to a customer?
So I think the most important thing that tends to be underrated is culture, right? So my brands are in 75 industries and pre-screened. So food is one of those 75 brands. And I could have the most amazing business in the world, but if you're not going to fit into the company's culture, then you're not a fit. And some of them are more sales based than others, right? Look, the other things that I'm looking for something that has good profitability. What are your profit margins? I'm also looking for something that has a track record, meaning is the management team strong? Is validation strong as well? And I'm also looking to connect my candidates with three different things, right? I don't want to give them Chick-fil-A and Cane's and McDonald's because that's not really much variety. People tend to gravitate towards different business models.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So, so then when you're making a recommendation, you're not being so disparate as saying, okay, you've got mosquitoes, you've got a restaurant, and you've got, I don't know, some other variety of franchise. Instead, you've sort of narrowed it down based on their interests or whatever. And so you might provide food, but you're not going to have like three competitive chicken strip businesses.
Exactly. Because now 80% of my placements now, nothing against brick and mortar retail, have recently been non-brick and mortar. And that's just because people, they don't like to sign a 10-year lease. That's just kind of a non-negotiable for them. And hey, that's great.
Yeah. And so are you seeing then, is that sort of like, I guess we could call it a trend or an industry trend? Like, are you starting to notice that people are moving away from brick and mortar and moving more into, I guess these must be service-based businesses or something that are kind of on the rise?
I certainly have. I mean, this is something I've seen over the past 5 or 6 years. And look, for the right person, brick and mortar retail can make a lot of sense, right? It has some advantages, meaning it's like marketing that's just there. The fact that you have my friend is a Ben and Jerry's franchisee here in Houston. And I asked him, I'm like, why do you have this expensive place? He's like, Adam, it's real estate. When people drive by, they get excited about Ben and Jerry's and it helps my catering side of my business, right? So, but there are disadvantages, namely that expensive lease that's in your name.
Yeah, the lease would be a huge. You'd have to make sure that you're in the right market and the right fit for you to justify taking on a lease before doing something like that. Do you have a complete list of your franchise opportunities available to preview through? And do you, if someone has an interest in a franchise that you don't necessarily represent, can you help them get into one, even though that's not up your alley?
So look, I mean, I have people come to me and they're like, hey, I've been talking to X franchise. I don't think this is the right fit for me. And I give them honest opinion about whether or not I think it's a good fit or not based on business characteristics. When it comes to my list of franchisors, right, I'm here to narrow things down, right? There are many different brands out there. My service is really to kind of not give hundreds or thousands of brands, but just to really give three that really a personalized service that matches my candidates.
So in our conversation, I may have already stepped on some of these things, but, like ideas of sort of not necessarily guaranteed ROI, but, good likelihood of success and things like that. What are some common myths or things that people come to you with that are like, hey man, this is my belief about franchising, for good or for bad. And how do we dispel those? Like, what are sort of the top few myths that you can think of that people bring to the table about franchising?
First one of it only being food, right? It sounds like both of you thought about food, right? When you think of franchising, as I mentioned, I work with brands in 75 industries. And if you mention an industry, things such as, I don't know, mosquito spraying or home health care or other industries like maid services, those are all franchise brands, or fitness, right? That would be myth number one. I think the second myth, too, is that you mentioned McDonald's and you mentioned millions of dollars. Yes, it's not chump change, but relatively, I can get people into an amazing scalable service business, right, for under $200,000 all in. That's really, really interesting. I think the other myth that I would say that comes to mind is people say that I need to be in this business full time. And that's really a big thing in my industry, meaning the question is, okay, how much time do I or my spouse need to spend in this business? And the answer is, I don't know how good you are at managing. I have a guy in Houston that is just an amazing manager, and he managed by having coffee in the morning with his staff. But great brands out there you're able to run it with managers, and you're able to run it potentially part-time and keep your day job. And I'm not saying that it's going to be, oh my gosh, X amount of hours per week, but some are more hands-on than others, some brands. I think that's interesting for people.
Yeah, can you break that down a little bit? I mean, it seems like, and this is just going to be me, generalizing, but it seems like something like a restaurant, for example, may be a little bit more hands-on. Just in you've got more head count, you've got more people you're dealing with, moving parts, I guess. Or something like maybe a service business. I mean, you still have personnel, but there's maybe a little less. I mean, there's less overhead. You're not maintaining a building. You're not fixing toilets. You're not doing any of that other kind of stuff. So while you could hire a great manager at the McDonald's or whatever your franchise is, it seems like there still might be more involvement from like maybe the landowner, the building owner, the whatever owner, So if that's all you, it seems like you could be much busier in something with a brick and mortar.
So look, I mean, the question that I heard from you is, hey, how do you determine what's more hands-on or hands-off? Kind of talk about the landscape of franchising when it comes to hands-on versus hands-off. What I can tell you is that I think that a big determinant about how much time you need to spend in the business is the model, right? So for instance, if it's a business model, some of my happiest franchisees are in the salon suite industry. And what that means is they go to a realtor they go to a building owner and they say, hey, look, let me sublease this space from you. And I want to put beauty professionals in this space. And what that means is it becomes a real estate investment. And so there are no employees at all. They might even have a keypad to get in with their clients. So if you can build this space up, it becomes the kind of business you could manage from your cell phone, right? So that's an example of a business that's less hands-on eventually. You're right. A Chick-fil-A franchise, that's it's a very hands-on model. That's one where if the air conditioning breaks at 2 a.m., you need to go ahead and take care of that.
Well, like with my U.S. Cellular store back in the day, I found out that I bought a job.
Yeah.
I bought now I'm stuck in this building, 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, and when you go to hire someone to work for you, now you have to pay them. You have to pay the lease. You have to pay for the equipment coming in. It's not one for the faint of heart per se. You have to kind of realize what you're getting into. I actually was offered to buy a Radio Shack here in Idaho recently, and yes, they are still around, but they're all franchises. They're all independent people that run them, and the thought of buying a 9 to 5 and having all the costs and the overhead that comes with it just didn't sound appealing to me. So I told him, sorry, thanks anyways, because it's one of those things. You have to know what you're getting into, and it's due diligence on your own end before getting into it, because you have to know it's something that you want to do and want to be a part of, because if you get into it and you don't enjoy it, you're just throwing money away, in my opinion. So.
And look, what I can say too is that my experience is that the best way to find this out is by talking to franchisees, right? So they'll tell you what's going on in the industry and in the franchise brand.
100%.
So we spent a lot of time talking about like different kinds of franchises and sort of, I guess, the onus of the franchise to the person who's trying to become the franchisee. But let's flip that around and let's talk a little bit about sort of the successful traits of franchise owners. So not only, you know, are you doing a service of vetting these different organizations for individuals, but how do we vet individuals for these organizations?
Well, what's the exciting thing about my industry is that different franchise brands are looking for different qualities, right? So, for instance, in my inventory, I have a metal, like kind of an odd lot metal franchise, right? Which you have leads coming in, and that means that you don't need to be a salesperson for this business. And so I have others that are very sales heavy, right? I have other brands where they're looking for people that are even door-to-door salespeople. The one thing that's kind of non-negotiable is you have to have the right sort of attitude, and you need to have some sort of business acumen. If you're looking for a passive investment, that I'd say go buy an index fund. But if you have some sort of business acumen, whether or not it's HR or accounting or sales, then there possibly is a franchise brand that would fit your skill set.
Okay, that makes sense. And I guess too, then, you know, maybe just kind of to that end, you know, as people are deciding that they, you know, or as you're vetting a customer to decide if they're the right person for a franchise, I mean, what are the sorts of things that a person should be prepared with? I mean, obviously we've talked, you know, just thrown out numbers around the cost of getting into a McDonald's franchise. And you mentioned that you could maybe get somebody in for 200 grand, but how do I need to come to you prepared? So part of it, you know, maybe I need to have some, you know, access to money and some things like this, but what are sort of the basics that, you know, if I'm going to have a conversation with you about getting into a franchise, that I ought to be prepared to bring to the table?
So great question again. And what I would say, Ryan, is this, that you don't really need to come to me with anything, just an open mind, right? I'm able to connect you with different financing sources, et cetera, and to tell you if I think you're a good match for franchising or not. But it's got to be the right, there's most of my people that make this investment, there's got to be a fundamental reason why, right? And it might be, gee, I'm tired of corporate America and I want to have an exit plan. Or it just might be, hey, you know, I'm ready to go. I don't want to work for the man anymore. That's kind of the reality that I'm in with my candidates.
Yep. Okay, that makes sense. I guess then, sort of as we're getting kind of to the end of our conversation, you've got a heart out today. I guess, you know, I guess I'm just trying to really wrap my head around, you know, why I might do this instead of opening my own business. I can see some clear things like the processes and things like that. But like, if you've got somebody that's on the fence, you know, what's your pitch? How do you turn them into a franchise owner?
See, it's interesting you should ask me that, frankly, because I don't see myself as a salesperson, right? I see myself as someone that's going out there and making connections and giving them information about franchising. What I would say is the way that someone would know if they're a franchise match or not is the kind of person that is unhappy with their current situation. They want to change it, right? And they see the value in this system and this process. And because of this system or process, I'm exhibit A, because of my experience in franchising, they're able to build a business and to scale it much more so than if they were to start this business on their own or keep their day job.
Great. Is that pretty common, people keeping their day job and stuff while they're doing this, or is that maybe the exception, not the rule?
No, I would say that you don't necessarily have an avatar, but many of my candidates, just anecdotally, maybe 30 or 40% is a husband and wife or spouses, and one spouse keeps their day job, one spouse doesn't.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. I guess, you know, you don't really think of it because I think kind of like Mike said, you know, or at least the base assumption is that you're kind of creating a job, right? I mean, like, this is what I'll be doing for work. So the mindset of an investor versus the mindset of a business person, I think, is an interesting distinction.
Absolutely. And look, some of my candidates want to buy a job, and I respect that. And that's a different type of match than someone that is looking as an investor that's sophisticated.
So you also mentioned that you can connect people with financing and things like that. I guess for whatever reason, it didn't occur to me that might be an option. So how does financing and that sort of stuff work?
So I'm not an expert on franchise finance, but what I can tell you is that most people don't realize how many options are out there, right? Probably the best thing to do is if you have enough money, some people don't want to actually sell all their stock, right? Although if you're an NVIDIA stockholder, maybe you wanted to sell it a few weeks ago because of DeepSeek. But look, you can borrow against your stock portfolio. You can find home equity in your house. You could also be in a situation where you have a 401k and you're investing in Amazon or Disney, and then you see Disney has horrible earnings. You can invest in yourself instead without penalties. So it's your retirement account that's actually owning the franchise brand. And then there also, as a last resort, there is an SBA loan, which is a possibility, right? But there are all these different options for people that want to invest. And sometimes franchise brands do provide in-house financing as well.
Okay. And is it better to come prepared with that sort of stuff? Like, should I have talked to my banker before I come meet you, or is that not prerequisite?
One of the great things about my service is I'm here to kind of talk to people at the very beginning. They don't really need to come prepared at all. That's always helpful if they somehow know what their investment level is. Typically, I'm looking for people that have at least $50,000 in cash and $150,000 in net worth on a minimum on that end. But look, I mean, if you have the resources, you could potentially borrow in order to get this.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Well, cool. Adam, I really appreciate you taking the time to sort of explain how all this works to us. I think franchising in general is an interesting topic, or is it a way to sort of, I don't know, give people a way into entrepreneurship, or maybe it's not even good to think about it that way. Maybe investor as an investment is really a different, I guess I hadn't thought of it that way. So I appreciate you taking the time, though, to kind of break it down for us.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You want to tell
I appreciate it.
where they can reach out, how they can get in touch with you if they have any questions?
Sure. So the next step is if anyone's interested in franchising, I do promise to let you know if I don't think you're a fit. It's a 15-minute chat. You can directly link to my calendar at franchise.com. Alternatively, if you just want to look at testimonials, and if you potentially want to just kind of find out more about my service, and there is a calendar link on that as well. It's on franchise.Coach.net.
Perfect. Great. Well, thank you, Adam, so much for taking the time to visit with us today. Really appreciate you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Ryan and Mike.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes in the show this week and every week. And we'll see you guys next time.